First of all, thank you so much, Karen, for accepting this invitation. And let me introduce you first, because you are a negotiation expert and the co-creator of the quantum negotiation method. And you have spent decades helping professionals build confidence through social intelligence and non-coercive negotiation, which I really, really appreciate and like. And in this conversation, we will explore how these skills can help us and why those skills are important in business and also in leadership and in our everyday lives. So let's start with the basics. Why do you think that it's important to learn how we can make decisions? Because we make decisions every day, as you said, and it can feel extremely hard for many people to even think about negotiate or taking a decision.
Thank you so much, Zsuzsanna. I love having this chance to work with you and all of your colleagues and everyone that we can reach, because I really believe so much in this topic that negotiation is such a human experience. And to be human means that we become vulnerable. And when we really need something, for example, when we're problem solving with someone else, or if we are sharing limited resources like a budget in our family or at work, or if we're creating something new and we're bringing our ideas together, we can automatically, and this is part of our human experience, is we are so anxious to get what we need that we forget that we are in a relationship. So a lot of the work in negotiation has to do with understanding the nature of the relationship that you are in. Because often we think we don't have any power or we don't have any leverage. And some of the fundamentals in negotiation have to do with understanding that you are in a negotiation, first of all, that you have something, the other party has something, and there often are common needs, common goals. So that's the first thing to remember around the relationship. And then the other is that when we think we are in a monopoly situation, that is, that company or that individual or that family member has all the authority, all the resources to reward and punish us, that is a monopoly situation. Are we really in a negotiation situation when we don't have any resources? But I've asked this question all around the world, and the more we talk about this, we discovered that that monopoly of power is more of a perception than it is real. And that's a lot of what I'd like to talk about today, because many of us don't have that monopoly of power to be able to reward and punish others. But we seem to run into people who believe they have the authority to reward and punish us because they have all the resources to punish others. So thinking of when we are in a negotiation, be conscious of it, and be conscious of you really are not zero leverage in a monopoly situation, which we're going to talk about today, because it's about our perception.
Yes, thank you for this. And speaking from experience from conversations with other women entrepreneurs and even university students, we often notice that it's even more difficult to take decision as a woman, not to mention to enter into negotiation. So why do you think it's so, especially today's complex world?
Well, that's a very long historical question, and now you and I have talked about this a lot. And as a political scientist, I have been extremely interested in it. And in my undergraduate work, I studied social change and development, which means how do people that didn't have structural authority, and in many ways, that's saying a lot of our Western cultures have been dominated by a more patriarchal, male-dominated authority system. So it's in our DNA to have experienced a more patriarchal more authority comes from being male. But over time and over all the studies I've done and the experiences I've had, we do know how to make social change, even when we don't have all of that authority. And a lot of that has to do with how aware are you of yourself and how do you understand these historical movements? And I think that's what I'd like to really talk to you and all of your colleagues about today is when we do feel this kind of inability to have all the decision-making authority, do we have any options at all? And really, power is not about positional authority in the end. And let's remember that a lot of it is perception.
Yes, that's true. You often emphasize the importance of practice when it comes to negotiation. And today, many universities offer courses in negotiation, and historically, rhetoric and technique were core parts of education, even in ancient times. What do you
Right.
think? Why negotiation and learning negotiation and communication is still very important for us?
I love that question. Why is it still so important? And we've been studying this for years, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that in the world of negotiation where I came from in political science, it comes from the earliest days of diplomatic studies. Very old, probably 17th century, there was a lot of discussion and scholars who started looking at what does it mean to be diplomatic, as opposed to using military and monopoly power to get what you want. So it's something that is part of the human experience that we generally come into a situation feeling very vulnerable, and we learn to identify where there might be some areas where we could develop more power by asking more questions, by building alliances, by managing our own responses to feel inferior or to feel vulnerable, and to forget how much leverage that we actually do have. So practice is important because we can think about it, but yet when you get into that space where it looks like you don't have any support, you're vulnerable, your needs are not going to get met. When we think about how our brain works and our neural system works, that we generally become afraid, whether we're conscious of it or not. And our behavior will default to defense or offense. So what we find, especially in role plays, that's why a lot of the work I did with training and education had to do with role plays. And over time, I actually found that one of the easiest ways that we can practice is to take some of the principles from applied improv. That is, how can we be put in a surprise situation, think on our feet, but yet remember to make our partner look good, to remember to think of communication freezers like no or but continually use yes and. That I find that that practice trains our nervous system to not feel so afraid in a surprise situation, or that anxiety when we're in a group of people. How do we manage that? We can only manage that through practice. And that's why I think it's interesting in the world of diplomacy, there's a lot of practice. They want young diplomats to get a lot of practice. And that's the same if you're working as a negotiator for a company. You'll get this opportunity to practice because what you plan doesn't always happen in reality because of anxiety, because of our nervous system, which is very human. It's a very human response.
Yes, that's true. And what you are talking about seems a little bit different from the other approach that we often can see at the universities or especially on business courses, which
Yeah,
is about manipulation, how you can manipulate others to get what you want. So what is
yeah.
the difference between quantum negotiation and that kind of negotiation? Can you speak a little bit about that?
I would say that the biggest differentiation is that, first of all, we're going to spend some time in a quantum negotiation platform. We actually start thinking about first of all, the nature of the relationship. Do we need each other in somewhat similar ways? So that's number one. If that's true, then we can explore common interests and we can actually go to a quantum level of exploring all the potential ideas we have together versus thinking of a more manipulation, coercive strategy, which oftentimes might get related more to what's called rights-based strategies. That is, you use the law, you use policies to get what you need. And if you damage the relationship in that process, that's okay. Because the goal is that you win relative to others, or that your rights are being upheld. When we look at quantum negotiation, we look at the nervous system, for example. This is very hard to do, is to ask you more questions, empathize with your situation if you've just used coercion with me. However, using the quantum anchoring method, which is, how do I think about this negotiation? Have I done a lot of planning? Do I understand that I actually have more options here? So on an intellectual, mental state, you do some work around who's really on the field and how many stakeholders there really are, and what is my role in this relationship? What do I have to offer? The next step in quantum is to think about your emotions. Why am I thinking scarcity? Why is it that I believe I'm never going to win? How do we shift our mindset to an abundance mindset and in emotions that I will get what I need and I can listen and empathize with how serious this is for you as well. Then on the physical dimension, we anchor ourselves to know that I do get anxious and understand that my physical body might just take over when I'm really anxious, and then I don't remember to slow down. I don't remember to ask questions. So if you have some physical pain, or if you're extremely tired and you're coming into a very important negotiation, how do we slow our physical body down and be in a sense of well-meaning and well-being when we go to that negotiation? And the other is to think about my behavior. I want to show up and cooperate and listen and turn take and ask more questions. However, how do I plan for that behavior when I feel like defending myself or interrupting others? And then that's why practice is important. And then the last area that's really important in the quantum area is really thinking about what gives me meaning. And I have found in a lot of negotiations, people will forget that sense of spiritual meaning. That is, this negotiation just represents one piece of my experience. And the way I behave, the way I cooperate, the way I ask for what I need, the way I advocate for myself, I feel that that's an important part of my sense of meaning in my life and in my company and with this relationship that I'm in. So when I think about the quantum dimension, I like to break it down into, let's spend more time understanding who we are and how do we anchor ourselves? How do we work with our human nervous system? And then, how do I understand all of those dimensions in my counterpart? We generally forget that they also have a scarcity mentality. They also might have some physical issues. They also have their own spiritual sense of meaning and purpose. So I find that the quantum area is really looking at who we are, not spending so much time on how we're going to negotiate, like the strategy and tactics. And we always will look at strategy and tactics are about, how do I ask the right questions? How do I understand that in a negotiation, there's a push energy? We have to state our demands. We have to close with what we need, but then there's a pull energy. how do I know that a negotiation is going to have these different energies and I need to be able to style shift into one or the other? So it's a lot of focus on who we are and who our counterpart is and why are they negotiating. And it's not just the agreement. There's some other larger, more interesting, more powerful interests underneath an agreement in any negotiation, whether it's at work or in your family or in your neighborhood.
That sounds very complex. Even
But
just
it's
to think
not.
about what you have to practice, what you have to take
Yeah,
care of when you are talking to someone else and you have your
yeah,
common aim, an agreement. So
yes,
it's, I guess it's not easy to practice it.
yes,
You often say that there is no place without authority. And women often suffer under power structures that reward domination,
yeah.
or what you call power over,
Mm-hmm.
usually. And what alternative approaches to power do we have that is more sustainable and more inclusive?
I love that question. And you know that power over and power with are two concepts I've studied academically and that I have practiced in my own personal experience. And I have a lot of stories of people who learn to move from power over to power with. So in general, power with is using all domination, and a lot of times they're called dirty tricks. What are some of the psychological tricks you can get somebody to be anxious to close or get somebody anxious to give you what they need? Power with is how can I manage my nervous system so I can lead in an engaging discussion and exploration where we can find what our real true needs are. And a lot of times our needs are unspoken. For example, I've been working with someone recently that she was so concerned about getting what she needed or being legitimized in a negotiation with a colleague on a team that she just was so defensive the entire time, as opposed to she understood that she was very vulnerable. And she thought I should use these power over domination and tricky tactics. And it was exhausting and she got nowhere with it. So she decided to step back and realized that she never asked any question about the counterparts. And she realized that she actually created more leverage in her team than people who had more structural authority than her. So she realized that, my power isn't dependent on whether I have authority or not. It depends on how well I ask questions. She actually, what she would call, she found a gold mine by asking more questions that people just needed to feel respected and validated because they all had worked on this project and nobody ever thanked them. Nobody ever said to them, you worked overtime, you put in a lot of effort, you've done a great job with this. So she switched from trying to manipulate them in the team to actually now start of appreciating and empathizing. And she got them to engage to partner with them in terms of how they were going to solve this budget. They had a budget problem on this project. So they just kept blaming each other. But yet they found that if we just pull our resources together, we can actually get this done. So she gained a lot of leverage because she knew how to ask the right questions. And she became more legitimate. She became much more higher reputation than those who had structural authority on that team. So people went to her and shared resources with her. And she just found that that was just a switch in her mind of not thinking about herself, but actually taking time to go talk to others and empathize with them. It seems like a soft skill.
Yes, it seems like emotional intelligence,
Yes,
being emotional intelligence for negotiation, which is
exactly.
also important, but people teach it more to use it for manipulation, to
Yeah.
manipulate your your stakeholder to get what you want.
Yes. Yeah, it's
Uh,
true.
it's good to hear that you can use emotional intelligence in another way for
Yes.
negotiation.
Yes. And maybe you know this word, Susanna, because you speak German. But when I first started reading about emotional intelligence, Daniel Goldberg was one of the early kind of mainstream writers to put it into the mainstream. And he talked about how he had studied this concept called Zeitgabe, which is some leaders who are so good at understanding fear in people that they use emotional intelligence in two different ways. One way is if, and he used Hitler as an example, somebody who is really understands how fear exists, you can emotionally entrain people to do something they necessarily would not do. And that is, you make them so afraid at all times that then you follow the leader. So that's one element of Zeitgabe.
Mhm.
The other is a leader who knows that fear exists, like in a team, anxiety, self-defense, just, lack of self-esteem, lack of experience, knows that that fear exists. So manages their nervous system to be calm, like we talked about, anchoring yourself first, come not with a scarcity mentality or a fear mentality, but bring that presence or that emotional calm into a group and then start to match with the group and then to be able to pace with them and understand their needs and understand their energy and style shift if they have very vast different cultural preferences. And then you lead. So you match and you pace and then you lead because you can actually, emotional intelligence and social intelligence is contagious. You can actually bring either that strong, desperate, agonizing fear, or you can bring a calm fear as a leader to a group. That's why, as you say, they're working on our own emotional intelligence is going to impact how well we behave and help and train others to do something they may not do, which is to cooperate and to
Mm.
share and feel vulnerable and to be curious. So I just always love these two major concepts, and you can see that both work. And all of us need to be aware that there are some leaders who use fear to get us to be afraid all the time and need to yield to that dominance and to that authority, right?
Right.
But we are prepared. You can see that that is not, it doesn't give you any power, really, and that you aren't going to get your needs met. But you can find others who do understand your need to engage and be curious. So I know it feels some days that women don't have structural authority, but we have changed the world in so many ways. And I think there's a lot more work needs to be done on just exploring how much leverage and how many resources women have brought to both work, political, and neighborhood and home situations. It's fundamental.
Yes, still, economist Linda Scott, in her double X economy theory, points to aggression, speculation, and abuse of power as persistent forces in business and leadership, unfortunately, and also in politics. And we see even in so many places. For example, I
Yeah.
have noticed that in academia very much, and also I had discussions with other women. So I know how certain environments still educate people to underestimate women.
Yeah.
So in fields where women are more present and more visible, how can we prepare ourselves and defend ourselves, or even sit at the negotiation table if we experience this approach? this
Yeah, I
Romer approach.
totally believe that. And I know that the progress has been relatively slow, but just as examples in my own lifetime, it was very difficult for women in male-dominated careers. And a lot of us went into those, and it was a struggle because the fundamental assumptions for me around power were not power over. So it was hard to come into academia, for example, and adopt this approach toward power as power with. But when you do the research, you find that there's a lot of scholars who have been talking about this for a very long time.
Mm.
And the first scholar I met that was doing this work, her name was Mary Follett. And in the 1940s, she wrote and experimented and studied power with. So that has been coming, and it's very quiet. You don't see it much in the literature, but it's really there. And another scholar that's really good to read about this is an anthropologist, Rian Eisler, who has studied cultures from ancient times. These domination cultures also have had to exist with partnership cultures. And that's largely matriarchal partnership and patriarchy domination. But she shows that these things have always existed side by side. And our job is to open our eyes to where all the partnerships are, because there are. So I guess that would be my first, which I had to learn myself, was it's not all it's not all lost. It's moving slow, but in my lifetime, I've seen a lot of changes. More women in medical, more women in technical work. There's more women in law schools now today than there ever had been. So it's very, very slow and social change, but it's happening because women have built alliances. And that doesn't mean just with women. It means with men who really understand partnership makes their careers, makes their families, makes their companies stronger and healthier. So it's almost like a mind shift. How do we shift our mind to look for those alliances? And I guess the word to keep in our mind is always partnerships. Where can you build partnerships who maybe have more authority than you do? What is it that they need? What is it that they actually need to accomplish? What are their, you would never ask particularly, but what are the things they care most about? Respect, visibility, their families, their livelihood, their reputations. That when we understand that those needs are there, we can build partnerships with them. And don't forget, you all have more leverage than you think. You have your youth, your education, your contacts, your ability to navigate in a new complex world. You have a lot of resources to bring. So I think a lot of preparation is really building up all of those capitals that you have. You have strong intellectual capital, emotional capital. You know how to behave, social capital, your spiritual capital. You're so lucky at this age to be able to just be more aware of this. And I know a lot of you do a lot of mindfulness work, and you bring that strength and that hope and that idealism. Don't be discouraged. Just keep practicing.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. I think it's very important to note that negotiation can be learned,
Yes,
because unfortunately we didn't have those classes in the school, and I think that it should be obligatory maybe in the
yes,
secondary school to be
yeah,
able to realize when you have a difficult conversation or
yeah,
discussion, how you can behave, or what choices
yeah,
you have, how you use your resources or your power. Because
yes.
it's, if we are not aware of our choices or our
Mhm.
possibilities, that we have, it's very difficult to navigate ourselves even in career later on.
Absolutely. You said a really powerful word, and that is choices. You have so many choices because you are young and talented and connected, and you have all of this energy that you have more choices than you think you do. And but it sounds like a paradox. Well, which quantum is a paradox, that we basically are nothing, but yet we're everything. And in quantum, we also have this ability where you might not see any possibilities, but if you start to engage with another, you open up limitless possibilities. And so you have limitless possibilities. The other thing is you also know how to say no.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I find that that's one of the biggest lessons a lot of my coachees learn, is that when I know what my values are, how I think, behave, how I want to feel, how I want my physical health to feel, and how spiritually I want to have meaning in my life, I get to say no. And that's why, knowing you have choices, you get to say no to those areas where you don't seem to have any possibilities. And that's why you start out with the best case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Best case is I'm going to collaborate. I'm going to contribute. I'm going to expose possibilities, even if I don't have structural authority. I'm going to bring my leadership. And you might get to the place where, and I know you and I have talked about both examples, we both have had examples where everything that you've tried hasn't worked and you still aren't getting what you need, and it isn't good for your health, it isn't good for your well-being. Then you search your alternatives. And then you have a tripwire. You've set some time for a deadline for yourself, and then you walk to your alternative. But it's our job to create the alternatives, right? Nobody's going to do it for us.
So in negotiation, it's also not the end of the world if you cannot work together, because maybe you can just go and find someone else.
Sometimes it's actually a billion times better, right? And we've been
It's
trapped.
also a difference between the manipulative techniques, because they are teaching how to win.
Yes.
And
Exactly.
if you say no, or I will move on, then you can often feel that I am not a winner, I am a loser.
Yeah.
But in long terms, maybe that negotiation, if you say no because it's not good, it doesn't work out, which can happen, then you can just move on and try it again.
Yes. Yes. That's some of the most fun coaching sessions that I've done, is when the light bulb goes off and you realize, wow, I have so many more options than I thought I did. And then you talk to her after she's been gone from a certain job or a certain team 6 months later, and it's like it's the best thing that ever happened. It was a gift that it didn't work out there, because it took her in a whole different direction. Instead of feeling trapped, she actually started to really blossom and found a team or a company or a relationship that actually gave her more energy. And it's just so exciting.
Yes, but when you lose, let's say lose a negotiation, when you are in business, it can feel very frustrating. But still, did you see good examples after it that they had a better option, really, with this quantum negotiation method?
Yes. Yeah. I have many stories like that. And then what's interesting is, just as an example, I've had many students in my various courses from all over the world, and they bring a lot of material, like, for example, from buying a car. And a lot of those teaching manuals are just filled with manipulation, dirty tricks, techniques to get people to buy a car or a product or something. And basically, every one of them who have been trained in this and they use these techniques, if the person who comes in really knows what they want and knows what their walkaway is and knows what their alternatives is, none of those dirty tricks work.
That's true.
So I have found that interviewing many people who work in that kind of industry find that relationship building works better rather than trying to manipulate somebody into buying a car. Because then they have a long-term relationship. They keep coming back. The client keeps coming back year after year, or they bring their mother or they bring their sister, and they basically have marketing built into a good, meaningful sale and a relationship. So that's just an example how the industry teaches manipulation, but yet the reality is salespeople do better by building a relationship.
That's good to know. And
Yeah.
of course, high pressure negotiations happen to everyone, regardless of gender. But
Yes.
how can we prepare for them? How it is possible to train ourselves, and how can we, for example, if someone is really frustrated when she or he has to negotiate, is it possible to sit down and just negotiate in a successful and good way while feeling good?
Yes. It's like, you've heard the saying in all of our wellness work is like, you might be afraid, but still show up, right?
Mhm.
Just practice just showing up. And you may not actually do as well as you hoped you would, but then you keep practicing. And that's why I love two things I would say about that. One is the whole world of positive psychology, which is, let's say you practice all the positivity, you anchor yourself, you're ready to behave, and you get into that negotiation, and right away you can see that they set it up to be manipulative. Your chair is really low, have the heat on really high, they have 4 people there that you didn't expect to be there. Just the optics are trying to make you afraid right there. So you plan for that if that happens, you can plan for that piece in that might happen to you in that negotiation. So in positive psychology, we basically say, if I didn't do well in that negotiation or that meeting, you say, I am not a failure. You say, I'm going to prepare better next time. And you keep practicing. You keep changing your mindset to, I have more to learn. I have more to develop. And that's why I like doing what I call applied improv for negotiators, is that get some physical practice being in a setting where it's unknown. You might be meeting new people. You're going to be doing things and creating things that you've never done before. How can you take that mindset and keep getting that practice? Because that is going to build, it's almost like I think of going to practice sessions at applied improv is like going to a gym. You keep going, you keep building the muscle, and somehow our nervous systems then learn something new. It's like we change our brain around surprise. We change our brain around, I think I'm failing, or I'm a little too anxious for that. It just takes more practice. And then your nervous system feels comfortable with surprise, with change, with difference. So positive psychology and some practice in a gym on social behavior. And that's why I feel so strongly about the social intelligence lab, that as a lab, we can continue to come in a supportive, safe environment to practice and then to notice, where am I anxious? Where do I defend myself? And what do I notice about others? Because we notice when we do applied improv debriefs, we notice everybody is just afraid. We're not the only one who feels awkward, uncomfortable. But the more practice you get with it, just like, you've been in many different cultural environments, with that practice, you can actually style shift It becomes part of your whole social and your psychological makeup. Practice.
That's
Practice,
true.
practice.
Yeah. And can you say a little bit more about this social intelligence lab? How do you practice there? Because it offers some ways to develop their skills from empathy to non-coercive
Right.
negotiation. So how do you practice online? Is it possible?
Yes, it is definitely possible. And negotiation is a learned phenomenon. And we learned to negotiate all our life. So people will tell me, I don't know, I don't need to learn any more about negotiation because I've been negotiating my whole life. Yes, that's true. However, why are you so unsatisfied and disappointed today? Maybe we need to look at unlearning some things and relearning some new things. So in the lab, I have gathered together all the kind of curriculum and teaching materials that I have found have really helped. So I've organized them in the VARC model, meaning the learning style you might have. So just as an example, if you tend to be more of a visual learner, I have videos and have examples, case examples that you can watch. If you're more of an auditory, then I have a workbook and a share manual and an audio course that you just listen to on the train or taking your walk. Then I also have a lot of reading material, articles and a couple books I've written, and especially around cultural differences, how that can impact our nervous system. And then on the K, kinesthetic, this is where we would do practice. And I would like to hold monthly or bi-monthly. If we get a lot of people, we would run them every week, just practice sessions. How do I practice turn taking? How do I practice listening? How do I build on others' ideas? How do I actually use yes and? So the VARC means visual, auditory, reading, and kinesthetic ways of learning. And we all can learn all those approaches and all of that practice, I think integrates a strong confidence and a sense of well-being when it comes to problem solving, creating something new, or being able to create something with others. So I really believe in the lab idea, and there's a lot of teaching materials and coaching, and we're building a peer network. And it's fascinating because there's people from all over the world and from many, many, many different fields. So I really believe in it, and I look forward to having more interactions with all of you.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you also for sharing this concept of power with, how it works in negotiation and how we can multiply our limited resources with this technique, and how we can learn that in the social intelligence lab. And I really hope that we can meet there and we can continue this discussion, because I have many other questions to you later. So let's continue this discussion and meet in the social intelligence lab.
Thank you very much. Thank you.